All right, so this machine here is a kind of a fun toy. This is a luggable PC in the ancient tradition, except that instead of being from the late 80s to early 90s, this is actually a, well, I wouldn't call it modern necessarily, but it's a 2006 era chassis. And I say chassis because this is not actually a luggable in the classical sense of being a purpose-built machine. What this actually is just a generic PC case. So what you see here is a keyboard and trackpad, and these are unfortunately PS2, but what can you do? And then a built-in 17-inch 1280 by 1024 display. Now, this is obviously not so useful for modern purposes because of the 4:3 aspect ratio, and indeed in 2006 this was already on its way out as far as relevance. But of course, this wasn't meant to be your daily driver / gaming machine, right? This would have been intended for special applications, which is exactly what it was used for. As far as I can tell, this thing was built for trade shows, specifically for demoing a 3D glassesless lenticular television that Philips was building back in 2006, which there's a video on YouTube I found demoing this thing at CES, and for all I know, this is literally the computer that was driving it at the time. But anyway, the point is, for that sort of application, you wouldn't need a top-of-the-line user interface. This is just the bare minimum required to interact with the thing. And in a lot of other cases, this would be like, a crash cart sort of situation, something where all you need is a basic interface so you can get a terminal up or talk to a piece of hardware, like maybe an embedded machine controller using a special app from the manufacturer, that sort of thing. Again, you don't need a 16:9 display to do that. So this is adequate for pretty much anything that you would have built a luggable machine for by this point in time. Anyway, so what we have is the keyboard, the monitor. There's actually, around on the side here, you can see controls for a speaker system, which you might think is this here, but it's not. That's actually a fan, which is terrific. This thing actually has excellent cooling, all things considered. However, it might make you wonder where exactly the speaker is, and as far as I can tell, it is literally glued to the back of the monitor. So you're never going to get peak quality audio out of this thing. It's really just for hearing the Windows bonk noise. And from what little I've been able to test it, it actually sounds better than you'd expect, but it's definitely a horrible muffled mess. So this I think is almost a suggestion. I think you'd never want to have that anywhere below maximum. Anyway, so around on the side here, we've got two 5 1/4 inch drive bays, then two 3.5 inch drive bays. So you could put a pretty decent amount of storage in this thing. And then around on the other side, we've got a standard PC card cage and ATX cutout. So like I said, you can put any ordinary motherboard in this thing. This is not a purpose-built device. It is just a chassis that you build up your own system in. So as you can see here, the monitor connects with this little DVI pigtail, and then the speakers connect with a 3.5 millimeter pigtail. And then down here at the bottom, we've got the connectors for the PS2 keyboard and mouse. Anything that's got those connectors is going to work. And obviously, if you had an HDMI graphics card, you could adapt that to DVI. And if you had a USB only board, you could just put these through a USB adapter. Yeah, all very generic, all things considered. This here is your power supply, and it might be hard to see actually, but this is a standard ATX supply, so you can put any old PSU in here. This whole panel, by the way, comes off with just these two bolts. This thing's actually remarkably nice to work on. You will notice this up here. That's obviously an artifact of its previous job. I'll show you a little bit of that when we take it apart. And speaking of which, I already have the back cover off this thing. It's actually kind of a nice back cover. Let me grab it. So as I said, this machine actually has pretty decent cooling. So here is what I assume is an intake fan. I can never remember. I think it blows towards the sticker, right? Does this have an arrow on it? Oh, okay, sorry. So that's an exhaust fan because the sticker's facing out. And then this one on the side, the sticker is facing in. Okay, so it intakes over here and it exhausts out the back. there isn't really any more room on here for fans. Pretty much every other square inch of the thing is obscured by equipment. So this is about as good as it could be. But that's still pretty good. And in this particular case, I actually have a GeForce 9600 in here. That's not the one it came with. The card it came with had blown caps, so I had to replace it. And this is a passively cooled GPU, which isn't necessarily the best choice for this sort of application. But given that the fans would draw the air directly across it, I don't know, it's actually maybe the right tool for the job. Anyway, a neat thing about this case side, though, I said it was kind of nice. You wonder what the hell that means? Well, all the screws are captive, so they actually stay in the case here, except for one. I don't know what happened here. This one became uncaptive somehow, so I just dropped it on the floor. So this is odd because it plugs in to the board with a standard 4-pin fan connector, but then it's got this thing, this extra connector. I have no idea why. And in fact, now that I look at it, this must be taking one of the signals or maybe a power rail and breaking it out to plug into some other header on the board. I had not noticed that until now. I have no idea what that's for. So getting down to the machine itself, though, as you can see, we've got a motherboard in there, and this is actually an eATX chassis. And per the manual for the thing, this was actually marketed as a server chassis. That's what the E part of the eATX is about, because server boards, I think they're a little bit wider, or maybe it's longer, or maybe it's both. In any case, this does in fact have a tie-in server board in it, as I'll be showing you. But there were a few different flavors of this case. This one, I think this is the EMP, not 390. The 390 was the top of the line. That's got, I think more 3.5-inch bays, among other things. This one, I believe, yeah, is this guy here, the EMP 370. But they go all the way down to EMP 340, and there's all different capabilities in there. So a variety of options to collect and enjoy. Actually, you know, I hadn't really taken a close look at this one before. I wonder how this works, because these appear to be card cage bays all the way from top to bottom. Then there's like laptop style floppy and CD-ROM bays down there. And then on the other side, we see like a little tiny server style power supply. So this isn't ATX at all. I wonder what it takes. Oh yeah, form factor is SBC/BP. So that would be probably single board computer / backplane computer. Oh yeah, here we go. 11 slots expansion capability to accommodate SBC motherboard and backplane. You would have a board that spans all the way from the top to the bottom, and it's just slots all the way through. And then the board itself is basically just a passive bus. And then the actual computer is a card that plugs into one of the slots. So rather than having like the ATX cut out and then having a portion of the case reserved for the ports on the board itself, the board would just occupy a slot like any other. That's neat, actually. I would love to get one of those. So I'm gonna have to keep an eye out for an EMP 350. That's pretty cool. Anyway, so moving on with this one, as you can see, we've got the ATX power supply here. We've got the drive bays here, and then this guy here, which is a brace that keeps the cards in here from vibrating. As you can see, this is locked pretty hard in place. Let me show you how that works. So this thing is an adjustable card brace. So we've got these rubber pads on these little brackets, and if you loosen the screws on here somewhere, oh, here we go. Oh, I see. I hadn't actually looked at this before. So these are actually threaded with captive nuts on the back. That's interesting. How does that work exactly? It's obviously the case that when you adjust these screws, it makes these things go in and out, but I don't exactly see the mechanics of how that works. So let me just, Oh, duh, right. No, I get it. Okay. There's threads pressed into the metal on each of these brackets, and then there's this, this nut back here with a nylock that's pressed up against the steel here, and then the bolt head is pressed up against the steel there. So these 2 points are fixed. And that, because there's no threads in the outer steel, the bolt is not going to pull itself forward or back there. So it just spins in place. And then the threads pressed into this metal cause this part to travel forward and back. That's really, really simple. And I don't know why it was so confusing to me. Anyway, it means that if we adjust the screw here, it makes that go in or out. But I'm having problems for some reason. I actually just almost rounded out the head on this one completely. It's jammed at this point, and I don't really know why. Something's happened to this over the years, or maybe it wasn't very well made. I'm not sure which. But anyway, you could tell what it's supposed to do, and it's a pretty clever solution. It seems a little inconvenient at first because you're like, wow, I've got to take this thing out every time I want to mess with my cards. But how often are you ever going to do that, right? So good idea. Let's set that aside. And actually, what'll make this a little easier is if I put the feet up. This thing actually has these little feet on the bottom that hold it in the tilted position. Makes it a little more ergonomic. But for our purposes, it just makes it harder to see inside. Speaking of seeing inside, you'll notice that there's also card guides back here. Now, these feel like sort of a holdover from computers of yore, right? Like full-length cards were very common back in the 80s and to a certain extent up into the early 90s. The early like Sound Blaster 16 and whatnot were still full-length cards. And if your case had card guides, then it could keep it a little more stable. Well, I think for some reason that's just not considered practical anymore. Nobody, I think, makes a case where the card guide actually sits at the end of where the card is likely to be. Instead, you've got this sort of setup where the card itself has this little plastic extension which reaches out to hook into the card guide. So I don't know if this is a standard. I have to assume that it is because this is a generic case, right? And they couldn't have expected these things to actually reach out and fit to a card, because if you look closely, you can see that these are not aligned with the cards themselves. Technically, it might be the case that if this card were longer, it would actually fit into this slot here, but the card isn't longer, and I don't know that anybody makes cards that long, so yeah, I'm not 100% sure what's going on with all that. These are adjustable to some extent, but I don't think you can move them out that far. Here, let's find out. Let's see, what does this do? Yeah, that just moves by about a quarter of an inch. So yeah, I think the way it works now is if you want to have hard guides for the end of your card, you've got to use this little adapter bracket. And I'm not super sure why. Why wouldn't it just come straight out? I must be missing something there. But I've certainly seen this in machines going back to, I want to say like the Pentium 2 era, Pentium 3 era, something like that. So some sort of de facto standard, or maybe it's a facto standard. I'm not sure. At any rate, though, let's get this card out of here. So this thing is a Matrox, oh gosh, what do they call it? Oh, there it is. There's the name. Yeah, this is a X.Mio, and this is basically a high-quality, uncompressed input-output card for video editing. It also does audio, I believe. I think there's an adapter cable that comes off of these connectors here to a separate backplane bracket that provides input and output jacks for digital audio. And this does, I believe it's 4 channels of HD SDI digital video and then 2 channels of output. So if you're doing a nonlinear video editing setup, that's what this was originally sold as part of, apparently. Back in like 2005, 2006, this would have been used for ingesting video from your cameras, or like digital VTRs or whatever, and then getting it back out with your finished product. So obviously, cash money millionaires. We've got a couple of enormous Xilinx, Vertex, FPGA devices here with PowerPC processor cores in them. Probably a pretty pricey card. And I don't know what Philips were using this for per se. Like, I understand that they were demoing a 3D TV, but I don't know what role this played in it. I have the software technically, but I have no way to use it because it actually expects to talk to the 3D TV. And since I don't have one, that's shot. But more importantly, I suspect the deal is that this never actually talked to the finished TV. I imagine this actually talked to a mock up, a prototype, something that was only useful at the trade show. And so probably the chances I'll ever be able to use this thing as intended are zero. Also, I don't know that there's really much I could do with this card, period. The drivers do exist, however, and there's a little bit of information out there about things you can do with it. So at a minimum, I think at some point I'm going to have to build up a machine and put like Adobe Premiere 1.5 on it, that horrible thing, so I can give this a shot and see what it does. But really, when it comes down to it, it's not all that exciting. It's just a video capture and output card. There's lots of stuff that does the same thing. The most interesting thing about it, however, is just this right here. This is a PCI-X, or I think it's PCI-X. I can never remember. There was the other standard that was similar but different. Anyway, it's 64-bit, 133 megahertz PCI, and it was a stopgap between plain PCI and PCI Express, which was used for a bit before PCI Express came out, when AGP was solving this problem more or less for graphics cards, but it wasn't useful for other types of device. So PCI-X was quite rare. You only saw it in super high performance devices, but it's actually why they had to go with a server board for this application, because by 2006, they were still making server boards that had a combination of PCI Express and PCI-X. Now, you couldn't get X on any consumer machine at all. You had to get either a workstation or a server, which both used the same class of board, basically. But that imposed requirements on the rest of the machine, which you'll see as we finish taking it apart here. Basically, if they had not needed to use that exact card, this probably would have been, you know, some cheap HP all-in-one or whatever. Like, really what they were doing here was not a particularly special application, and they could have used virtually any computer of the era to pull it off, I suspect. But due to that requirement to have PCI-X, they were forced to go with a board like this, et cetera, et cetera. Let's get the side panels off here. For some reason, this case designer chose to use hex head button screws for this instead of Phillips button screws. I have no idea why. It just forces you to use one more driver to take it apart. Like, it just sort of seems pointless. Also, interesting thing, there's only these two screws holding this piece of trim on, because the other end gets held on by the back panel when you bolt that down. I thought that was kind of clever. So with that out, you can see that the power supply really is just your standard ATX pattern. Now, they used these screws, which are Phillips heads, but there's identical looking ones on the other side that have a different thread pitch. So that was fun when I put this thing back together the first time. Oh, by the way, these screws here are also captive. So when you take this off, yeah, that makes things much more convenient. These are the screws I was mentioning that have the different thread pitch. I colored them with a Sharpie, so they're a little easier to keep track of. Now, this is neat. This is the drive cage, as I said, and these little rubber washers here would appear to be sound deadening devices. I can't think why else they would be there. It's weird because the rest of the cage is coupled rigidly to the machine, so I'm not sure what purpose those really serve. Anything helps, right? Anyway, so this is very convenient. You just take out those two screws and the whole thing just slides right out, nothing to it. Let's go ahead and swing this power supply out of the way as well, and now you can see the machine. So what we have here is a Tyan S2692, I believe is the model number. And as you can see, this is a dual socket board. And specifically, this is a dual Xeon board. You could tell if you're familiar with the era because this heatsink bolts on. I don't recall if AMD had bolt-on heat sinks at this point. Maybe the server chipsets were doing that. Maybe the Optrons and whatnot. I know the consumer ones were using that flip clamp. And then of course the Intel offering, the Core 2 Duo, was using the push pins where you pushed them in and rotated them. In any case, I'm talking out my ass. This pattern is definitely bizarre for the era if it were a consumer machine, but it's not. It's a dual socket 771 Xeon system. And this is what I was talking about as far as the PCI-X thing putting limitations on what they could use, because this machine probably didn't need a Xeon, and the proof is in the pudding, I think, because this guy is a Xeon 5110, which is a 2-core, no hyperthreading, 1.6 gigahertz Xeon. I didn't know they stacked shit that low. Like, that's the slowest server processor I think I've ever heard of. And it's not even that low power. It's a 65 watt chip. And in addition to that, they only put one in here. So I don't think that they really needed high performance. I think they went with the absolute worst, cheapest, lowest power Xeon they could find, because really, if they could have, they would have just picked a Core 2 Duo or a high-end Pentium 4 for this application, whatever was cheapest. But because they needed the PCI-X, I think that limited their options to boards that took server processors. So kind of a bummer, and also a bit of a bummer for me, because yeah, that's a pretty weak sauce chip. And that's part of why I'm tearing this thing apart right now, is because I would like to upgrade that chip. And I'd also like to put a second chip in it. And I'd also like to upgrade the RAM, all the above. So let's talk about that RAM for a moment, because that is a fun story that I did not know until now. All right, so this is DDR2, and it's 1 whole gigabyte of it, which is a depressing thing to think about. The idea of only a gig of RAM. Even in the DDR2 era, this was this was kind of on the small side. And 2 gigs total. Just, well, there's not a whole lot I'd like to do with this machine, but anything I would do with it, I would want more RAM than that. So I went down to my basement and dug around, and I came up with some. See, I've got a whole sack of the stuff that I pulled out of various machines over the years. So let's get some out. All right, this is, well, this is also a gig, but it doesn't matter. I've got some 4 or 8 gig sticks in there, but, well, you'll see what I mean. Let's just put this thing in. All right, that's one latch, and then let's just put the other in, and, well, it just rocks itself right back out. Why? Because this is not actually compatible. If we take a look at these 2 sticks side by side, look at that. The notches don't line up. And the reason for that is that these are actually fundamentally different types of memory. This is a DIMM, and this is an FB DIMM, or fully buffered DIMM. Now, buffered memory has existed for a really long time. I think back into the SD-RAM era and maybe before. And I don't exactly know what it means. I was under the impression that all it meant was that the memory chips sat behind a line driver that that basically just, I don't know. I mean, buffer to me, in electrical terms, is a thing that just guarantees signal integrity, but not here. Okay. So apparently, this has a thing called a SERDES, or serializer deserializer, and what it does is it basically talks to the memory controller on the board over a differential, like LVDS style signaling channel. So rather than being just memory chips that are on a parallel bus talking to the machine, this is apparently a whole load of differential signaling channels. And the reason it's got the heatsink, that was mandatory with FBDIMMs apparently, because that SERDES ate up enormous amounts of power, and so these got super hot. In fact, so hot that the only reason that this heatsink isn't bigger is because it was anticipated these would only be used in servers that had very heavy-duty active cooling. Apparently, when the Mac Pro came out, it also needed FBDIMMs, because that was the style of the time as far as workstation chipsets, which Apple had to use in order to get their the specs they wanted. And the fan requirements would have made the machine too loud. And so apparently they got these custom-made FBDIMMs with great big enormous heat sinks on them so that they could be more effectively cooled by the limited active cooling in the machine. Anyway, the moral of the story for me is that I can't use any of the RAM I have on hand, so I had to go looking for more, and I think I found more. Went to the RePC and picked up what appears to be 16 gigs of FBDIMMs. And I've just realized they're not as identical as I thought they were. I don't know, I mean, they're different color PCBs, and also one says Axiom and one doesn't, but the part numbers on the left are absolutely identical. So I guess they're just second sourced. Anyway, theoretically these should work. And I think, yeah, this is all 5300, and I don't think I care about like dual channeling or anything. I don't know if that exists on this machine. And I'm also not going for top performance. I just want more RAM. So I'm going to go ahead and install this all together. I'm not going to pull the 1 gigs because this way I should have 18 gigs, which is a very normal number, right? Okay, yeah, and that's got the right notch apparently because it went in. So, well, that's terrific. Let's go ahead and put this thing back together loosely. And we'll see if it powers up and boots, because I have doubts about the compatibility on FBDIMMs. That stuff seems so weird, and I've never messed with it before. I'm just going to go ahead and assume that it won't work until proven otherwise. Plus, hey, you want to see this thing turn on, right? And of course, this being a server board, by default, it just turns on automatically as soon as you plug in power. Okay. Fingers crossed that the damn thing posts. Okay, I just heard the fan slow down. That's encouraging. Okay, I saw a num lock. I saw a scroll lock. Yay, there we go. Cool. I mean, it makes sense, but still, I kind of didn't expect it to work. Oh yeah, 18 gig system RAM passed. Outstanding. Oh, by the way, I love this. Fan 3 has exceeded high or low limit. It does the same thing with the CMOS battery. It'll say that the battery level exceeded high or low limit. I don't know what was going on that they had to use this, you know, wizard is full of bombs and or keys messaging. Like, did they really not have the space to add a couple extra checks to see whether it was high or low? I've never seen a motherboard that did this, not even back in the 80s. So weird. At any rate, though, looks like our RAM worked. We have all 18 gigs there. I should probably run a memory test at some point. But that said, let's go over and take a look at processor information. Okay, so this is indeed a Xeon 5110 at 1066 on the FSB. My understanding, oh, right, I haven't gotten to this yet. So I have more chips. I have gotten some Xeons out of a bin of untested chips. I have no idea if they work. Now these are very similar. They are Xeon 5130s, which are almost identical to the 5110s. They're just like a variation on the same chip. These have, I think, the same amount of cache. Well, let's see, this says it's 4 megs. Yep, 4 megs. So same amount of cache, they're just 2 gigahertz instead of 1.6, and they have a 1333 FSB, which seems like it would improve things. And I have 2 of them, and given that these are dual core, no hyper-threading, the only way for me to get more than 2 threads would be to add a second chip. So I'd very much like to see this work, but I have no idea if it's actually going to. I don't know if these chips even function. So now that we've done this part, let's open it up again and swap the chip and see what happens. So it looks like the sync on here uses this funky combination Torx / flathead. Let me get the iFixit kit. Is it this one? Bigger. Is it this one? Oh yeah, that's it. Oh. Since these have heat spreaders, I probably don't really need to do the lug nut tightening and untightening pattern, but I think it's just a good habit. I do notice that there's pretty heavy springs on these, so I don't know. If I just took both the screws out on one side, that might put some pretty uneven pressure on the board. Almost. Okay, it's just that one. There we go. Okay. Oh. Wow, that's fresher compound than I would have expected. Now, one question I have is, how does the backing plate on here work? Is it, oh, I see. I had wondered how the sync actually bolted into the chassis. Typically on chassis that are designed for Xeons, you'll see, well, in this case, you can actually see one right here. Here's a standoff that came out with the bolt, and this was actually screwed into the chassis, it looks like, because I can see, yeah, there's standoffs back here, and it looks like they stacked up 2 standard case standoffs for each one of these in order to get it to bolt down. Well, the trouble is there are no such standoffs for the second CPU, and there are no holes in the chassis. I can't see them and I can't feel them. So it looks like this chassis was pre-drilled or maybe modified by the company that assembled this thing in order to put these standoffs in. So if I want to install a second one, that's going to be a little tough. But I do have a strategy, assuming we make it that far. To begin, oh, I probably shouldn't take that CPU out with it facing like this. I should probably flip it on its front so gravity isn't fighting us. I would take the power supply out, but it's kind of a pain. All right, 5110 out. 5130 in. Wait, what's the orientation here? Huh. I think I got the orientation right the first time. Just there's a there's only an alignment notch on one side of the socket, it looks like. I don't know that I've ever handled a socket 711 chip before. I'm only used to 775. Yeah, that was definitely correct. Weird. Where's my heat grease? I know I have some thermal combat here somewhere. Ooh. All right, due to an absolute comedy of errors, today is now tomorrow, my phone ran out of space in the middle of shooting this, and I spent the whole rest of the day trying to figure out a solution, which ended up being going out and buying a $150 Anker USB dock so that I could plug in an external storage device. It's absurd. Anyway, you didn't miss much. When the camera was off, I finished putting the goop on the processor, put the heatsink on, and fired it up, and it worked. But I'll just go ahead and show you that last bit again. All right, there's the fan slowing down, so it posted. Hi, by the way. Do you know how miserable it is shooting video of things with reflective surfaces? It's always like this. Okay, yeah, there we go. Xeon 5130 at 2.0 gigahertz. But of course, that isn't all that shocking because this board was meant to work with that exact chip. So it's good that the chip works, given that I got it out of, well, here's what the box looked like. Yeah, they don't much care for this era of hardware anymore. Even at the e-waste store, nobody wants these things. So they just go in a bin, you know. So now that we have this chip working, the next step is to get this chip working as well. And I think I said this earlier, but that's going to take some doing. So let's get this thing taken apart. Next step here is to get the power supply out. And I thought this was going to be a huge pain in the ass, but spoiler warning, I've already done this. I just lost all the footage and I'm doing it again. So I've already cut the zip tie down here. So this will just come out like yay. And then I've got two cables up here. There's a 4-pin Molex, and then there's a 4-pin mini Molex, whatever the hell you want to call it. And I have no idea what these go to. I'm guessing that at least one of them is driving the LCD display on the front. I'm thinking that's probably this one, especially since that takes 12 volts. Those are the only wires that are connected there. And then this little thing here, at a guess, because I can't quite see clearly, I would think that's the amplifier for the speakers. In any case, though, I can unplug the drives here and get this out of the way. Okay, another thing I think I lost when the camera shut off was taking these screws out. I had commented on the little rubber rings here and here. Those sure look like anti-vibration spacers, you know, to keep the drives from making as much noise on the chassis or to keep the fans and whatnot from degrading the drive performance or causing head crashes or whatever, which is a nice to have if you can get it. The question, though, is what difference does that make when this is just smacked up against the bottom of the chassis here, metal to metal anyway? Right? Well, if we slide these out, this definitely is just solid metal on the bottom. However, if we look in the bottom of the case here, they've got the mating rails attached to the chassis with more of these rubber spacers. So yeah, it actually does make a difference. All right, so we need to get this motherboard out, and I don't want to unplug any of these cables really. So let's just clip these and see if we can just fold this thing down. Actually, do I even need to do this one? Let's take the motherboard out first and see what that does. Wow, where are the screws? I guess this end of the board is just held in by the processor, the heatsink screws, I guess, because there's no other fasteners down in this quadrant. I guess that makes sense if you design the board with the assumption that the mating fasteners for this will be pressed into the chassis, then why do you need separate chassis mounts, right? I don't know how many servers or workstations I've ever actually taken apart, to be honest, so this is a little novel to me. Oh, weird. Huh. This fan is using one of those strange press-in Molex connectors. In case you've never seen one of these, this is a insulation displacing connector. So you buy these by themselves, and then you just lay the wires down in the back of the plug and press them in with a special punch down tool, or in a pinch, a screwdriver, and it pierces the insulation, and the little metal fangs inside contact the wire. It's a very common thing in certain industries. You don't see it too much in computers because generally speaking, they use crimp pins, which can be assembled, en masse. I don't know why they did it in this case, unless this heatsink was originally made for a board with a different type of connector on it, and they had to adapt it to this one, which would make sense. Also, yeah, sure enough, cranking that down did spread the grease out. Although, wow, maybe I did put too much on there. Whatever. Okay, so the board should be loose down there, and it is. Now I just have to lose the Phillips heads. Oh no, my driver's run out of juice. All right, we got anything else? Feels like there's maybe one more. Oh, there it is. Is there one more down here? Yes, there is. Buried under all these header cables. And those have got to go. And then I think, and this one. I wonder what on earth that's doing. It seems to be a fan header, but oh, strange. This would appear to be a tack lead that's fed into a second fan header over there. Why? Maybe because this board is designed to not be happy unless it sees two fans plugged in, and they couldn't figure out a way to solve that, so they just duplicate the signal to both headers to make the BIOS happy. That's got to be it, right? Never seen that before, but I guess when you're essentially doing OEM work, but you don't have the clout to customize your BIOS in any way, right? That seems like a situation you might end up in. Okay, well, the LGA socket looks intact. It's funny how LGA has just gotten more and more miserable to interact with over the years. When it was new, although it was perceived as a huge decrease in reliability, pretty much everybody was mad when LGA came out for the same reason that they are now. The idea that it moves the responsibility from the processor, to the board as far as like who gets replaced when a pin gets damaged. The thing is though, would you like to know how many processors I've seen in my life with snapped off pins or even like severely bent pins that could not be bent back and made to work? It's like 2 out of thousands, because I used to work e-waste, and we would just recondition chips with bent pins. I had some Pentium 4s and AMDs where the pins were actually laid flat completely, all the way over. I bent it back up with a razor blade and sent them out into the world. They worked perfectly. If LGA is damaged, your chances of fixing it are somewhere south of the border. It has been done, but it is incredibly rare, and it's just more fragile, all things considered. And so when LGA first came out, everybody was mad, and they predicted that the obvious results would occur, and then they did occur, which was an enormous number of motherboards got damaged in situations where the equivalent mistakes would not have caused a catastrophic damage to the CPU. Anyway, so we need to mount a second heatsink here, and I think I'm just going to be a barbarian about it. All right, so I picked these up at the e-waste store, and for one thing, I like the fact that they're matched. That original fan might work fine, but I dig that these are the original Intel OEM ones, and also that they'll be identical. So I think I'm going to try replacing the original one with this. Yeah, I like the way that looks. And then we'll see if we can install this for the second one. Now I have the backing plates for these. Here we go. They came off of a super micro system, I think, something like that. And they had these plates on the back of the board, but these are not the fasteners. These are basically just fancy washers. So you put these on here and they just provide essentially extra spring tension, because there's not that much spring in the bolts and the fasteners themselves. So what I'm thinking of doing is I've got these nuts that I found in the basement that theoretically will fit the fasteners on these heat sinks, and I'm hoping that there's enough length on the heat sink that it can go through the board and make it into the nut. I think what I'm supposed to do is, you see these little fingers sticking out of this bracket? On the original board that this was on, those went through the holes in the board and sort of locked the bracket in place. Ooh, that is not a pleasant process. I think I'm supposed to sort of compress these. There we go. There's one. And There's the other. Okay. All right, that's in. And in theory, I should be able to drop this on there, though I need to get rid of this gunk first. One moment. All right, that looks good. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to put that on there. Do I feel it bottoming out against the processor? I can't really tell. It feels like it's floating. It feels like it's not going down all the way. But oh no, okay, because the posts are right up against the board, and they're not sinking through the holes in it. So I guess that's that. So now I just need to try and run the screws down. Ooh, man. I wonder if those nuts are going to fit with this bracket in place. I don't think they're going to. I think they've got too much shoulder on them, right? That's not going to work, is it? Oh, maybe? Okay, that one feels like it's partway in. Let's try another. Man, that is awkward. The bolts kind of feel like they don't like these nuts, which is strange because I matched the threads. But it might be one of those cases where I just have to sort of let them self-machine, you know what I mean? Maybe the thread wasn't absolutely correct, but for the application, I think if I just force it through, it'll probably do the job. Another interesting thing is that I was worried about the nuts interacting with the bracket, and they are, but I think what they're doing is basically the bracket sort of holding them in place, so I don't have to put a wrench on the backside. So it's sort of a blessing in disguise. This is a bad way to do it. I shouldn't be doing it this way, but frankly, it seems to be working. So I'm not going to look a gift processor in the mouth here. Yeah, I think that's actually doable. I just got to do the bottom ones now. Yeah, okay. Sucking the back plate down. I just have to make sure that I actually get it to tighten rather than just jam against the bolt because the threads don't quite fit, right? And then I guess since these processors are recent enough that they have built-in temperature monitoring, I should be able to compare the two chips because I'll be using the original mount for the other one, and we'll be able to confirm whether it's cooling effectively. I'm going to say, based on the wobble that I see there, that this is not actually fastened as well as it could be. And in fact, I can see these nuts are sitting all cattywampus, and I really have no idea why. They fit just fine when I tested them outside of the machine, so I don't know what's going on here. But the fact is that that seems pretty reasonable to me, so I'm just going to go ahead and move on with it. So let's reinstall the board. No idea where these were plugged in. I'm going to assume the gray ones. Yeah, sure, why not? And then, I don't know what this up here is, but I'm thinking it's the HD audio cable. Well, no, it's got a notched out pin in the corner, so that's got to be USB. I forgot to unplug the PS2 connectors out here when I took this apart, so I got to pull those out. Oh God, and then it's got those horrible little springy shield connectors on the I/O shield that are so bad about slipping inside of your network and USB jacks instead of on the outside. I hate those things. All right, let's plug our heat sink in and then clean up our second one. Looks good. I'll plug this in now because it looks like it's gonna be very hard to after I have it mounted. Now, I'm not going to bother replacing the compound on there. I think there's plenty. Oh, you know what? One of the standoffs came off with the other sink. So, ooh, wow, that is on there. Okay, that should go right in there. You know what? I changed my mind. There's not quite enough grease on there. God, I hate this stuff. I'm never getting this this Arctic MX6 again. The consistency of it is just miserable. It wants to just roll off when you try to smear it around. Well, that's a concern. Maybe these screws don't reach. Oh, wait, no, I just didn't have the sink in the right position. There we go. Boy, I'm only getting like 1 or 2 threads into those standoffs, it feels like. But hey, it's worth it for consistency, right? Look how much better this looks. is the hard drive cage gonna hit this sink? It just occurred to me, it looks a little bit taller. So I wonder if I've screwed myself. I'm gonna have to put the old sink back in. We'll see. God, I bet it's going to. Let's find out right now before we go any further. Oh my God. Yeah, it actually hits both of them. I can't even put it in there without drives. Oh no. I'm not smart. Well, this isn't my fault. The old sinks looked a lot bigger. Is that really that much smaller? Wait. No, it's not. Not really. That's not smaller at all. What the hell is going on here? Maybe it's the diameter of the fan that's a problem rather than necessarily how far up it sticks. I mean, that's definitely not going in. And like, no, I couldn't modify this. That'd be a crime. I'm just gonna have to look for different sinks if I'm gonna put this all the way back together. For the moment, let's just see if the damn thing works. Let me find a drive here. I think this is the one I was messing with, if I'm not mistaken. All right. Is that good? I wonder what I didn't do. It's weird. Everything's plugged in. Is the cable on here loose? No. I mean, I guess it's possible that the damn CPU is just that hosed. I wonder if those backing plates are not designed for this board and have shorted something out. Oh, I wonder if I just simply pulled off the header wire for the power switch. I think I might have. Because I see one dangling here. You know what? Let me just hit that with a driver and find out. No, I don't think so. Whoa! Shit! There we go. Oh, I see. I was looking at it from the wrong orientation. Well, let's just see if these fans slow down. Oh, there we go. Okay, it sounds like it's posting. So all I got to do is plug that connector back in. I had forgotten to plug in the power for the SATA drive anyway. Oh, and we should probably hook up the keyboard and mouse, and let me get the thing for that. Here we are, PS2 to USB adapter. Now, why is he doing that, you wonder? Well, with any luck, you'll find out. Did I plug it in to the right header? Yes, I did. Hooray! Boy, those fans aren't quiet. You know what, though? Companies like Noctua and Cooler Master, well, I think Cooler Master, at least, did make aftermarket sinks for server processors, you know, for workstations and whatnot. And so I may actually be able to go get a low noise socket 711 heatsink. All right, 2 processors detected, 2 cores per processor, 5130, 5130. Outstanding. Oh no. Okay, for a second I thought it didn't like the USB keyboard, but apparently it was just being slow. All right, now is it going to boot? Operating system not found. Oh, well, I may have plugged those SATAs into ports that aren't turned on. So let's go take a look in the BIOS. Well, it looks like the SATA ports are all enabled. Oh, you know what I bet the problem is? Remember when I was joking about which port to plug these SATA cables into? Well, dollars to donuts, those 2 gray ones over there are actually going to like a RAID controller rather than the onboard built-in. And so you either can't boot from it unless you do special things, or I have to go in and configure the drives as, you know, an array or a volume before they would work. So I'll bet that's the issue. Yeah, there we go. Fixed disk 0 detected. Outstanding. All right, fingers crossed that this still works. Still crossing them. There we go. Oh. Yeah, I don't think the USB keyboard works here. It's okay. It's okay. It'll work later. You know, I didn't actually check the BIOS for USB legacy support. By the way, this is why we needed the keyboard and mouse to be USB. I was talking to a friend who pointed out that the specs on this thing were curiously similar to the original Mac Pro, the 1.1. And so I said, well, obviously I have to Hackintosh it, right? The problem is there's no PS2 support on Mac OS without aftermarket drivers. And You can get those, but I tried and it didn't work very well. I just had endless problems. And so I figured this would be the quickest path to a resolution, to just put it through an adapter to convert it to USB, and it was. Wow, yeah, that's working perfectly. I don't know, I knew this would work, but I still didn't really expect it to work. I don't know. Horrible little keyboard. I don't know if you've noticed, but the layout is just terrible. It's got, is that the ANSI enter? I don't remember, but I don't like it. And it's got the compressed, it's got the arrows here in the middle. Like, it could be worse, right? At least it has a numpad. At least it has the page up, page down block. You know, it's not that tiny. It also has what appears to be a dead key down here, which is putting in, I don't remember. I think that's the section character, I want to say. This is the first time I'm hitting it, so yeah, and then if I shift that, it gives me the plus minus symbol. I have no idea what that's for. In every other regard, this keyboard's normal, but then it has that thing. I thought it might be like a dead key, like a compose key, but apparently it just, yeah, puts in the simoleon. I don't know why. In any case, though, this works perfectly and seems to be running really smoothly, which is making me think that it actually has drivers for this graphics card. So it thinks these are Core 2 Duos, which I wonder if that is because it's looking at the processor ID and it doesn't know what it is, so it just falls back to a default, right? So yeah, it thinks it's on an iMac 8.1. And I don't know if that's the fault of the Hackintosh job, if that's something they hard-coded, or if that's just the misdetection by the OS. I also really like that the bus speed shows up as 1.3 gigahertz. That is technically true. It's 1333 megahertz, but I've never seen anybody refer to it that way. Now, if we go over to graphics, okay, there's the vendor. How do we look at drivers? I can never remember how this works. Like, the fact that we're getting smooth quartz compositing makes me think that there is a driver loaded, but I guess it could be the case that it's just doing all this with Visa, right? Because on a processor this fast, the Visa might actually be quick enough to do it. I also noticed, oh, it's not running at native resolution. Ooh, uh-oh. This is a 1280 by 1024 panel, but this is only running at 1024 by 768. So maybe it doesn't have a driver loaded. That would not shock me, frankly. Let me see if I can get any programs on this thing. I tried plugging in the network before and it didn't work. And I don't think it's gonna work this time either. But we're going to give it a shot. Okay, so I've got lights on the NIC, but when I went into the network control panel the last time, it said it wasn't connected. Oh, it worked this time. Oh, delightful. Okay, let me just go to my website. Okay, perfect. Man, I shouldn't be surprised this is working so well, but I am kind of surprised this is working so well. So what are my options? This is 10.6.3. I assume that Google is not going to work on here. Oh yeah, no dice. That's not surprising. Let's see, 10.4 Fox is dead, but wasn't there like a 10.6 Fox? Let me go see if I can find an updated browser. Okay, well, after several hours of fighting with this thing, I can't get the NVIDIA drivers to install. I can't get any information about what I should do with it because all the old Hackintosh articles have rotted. People just walked away from them the moment they didn't need them anymore, which is the way this has always been. If you want to install like 10.11, 10.12, the information on that is like 2/3 broken links. Nobody bothered to make any of it retrievable in the future. They just wham bam, you know, straight through to the next thing. This happens with the all the Android hacking forums too. It's really frustrating because you go to like XDA developers and there's like 500 threads proudly announcing that they've gotten such and such version of Android running on such and such device, and then all the links are to like Dropfile and all these other sites that are just long dead. And nobody at all has bothered to put any of this stuff on Internet Archive. And that's why I just went ahead and installed Linux, which has been a much more pleasant experience, which is actually kind of shocking for me because, to be honest, I've always been the emperor has no clothes about the whole put Linux on your old computers thing, because when I've tried it, I have never gotten a usable experience. But to be perfectly frank, this has kind of shocked me. A lot of stuff that does not typically work on machines that I'm messing with from the mid-2000s actually does work, and I'm not sure what to make of it. So this is Linux Mint something or other. It's whatever the current version of Linux Mint is. And the first thing I did was I installed some games, because you know, what are we doing here, right? So I put a Radeon RX 470 in this because I didn't think I could get a GeForce 9600 to work in Linux, and also, come on, we're trying to give this thing a fighting chance. And I fired up Dark Souls 3. And this runs at like, I don't know, I want to say like 20 FPS. Not sure. Ooh, that's not 20. So yeah, it's not doing well. But to be fair, it is running. I realize that this game is probably fairly GPU dependent, but at the same time, I don't think I really expected it to run even this reasonably on a couple of 2006 Xeons, right? I mean, it's definitely CPU bound because I looked up a video of this game on an RX 470 and it runs at like 60 FPS constant at 1440, I think. So it definitely should be faster than this. It's definitely maxing out the CPUs. In fact, you know, if that's the case, then I could probably turn up the graphics settings. I have them at minimum, but really it shouldn't make a difference, right? Yeah, not particularly. That looks about the same frame rate. So hey, at least there's that. Oh boy, yeah, this frame rate. Oh man, it's really hard to react to this thing. I feel like I'm walking in mud. But you know what? You can adapt to it. Oh, I'm out of Estus. Whoopsie. And there's that, yeah. So definitely playable, especially if you're used to lower end machines, and to be honest, I'm really not. But the fact that the CPUs, albeit pegged, are still keeping up with it at all sort of shocked me. I didn't expect that. So then I went over to YouTube, because typically on older machines, when I pull up YouTube, that's where it all falls apart. Like, even if you can get the web browser to work, right? And that's asking a lot, because JavaScript VMs just destroy CPUs. You go to any modern website of any complexity, and a lot of the time it'll just, if your CPU is older than like the mid 2010s, it just puts it in a sarcophagus. But I was shocked to discover that the site actually loads and is perfectly navigable. Like, okay, that's a little on the sluggish side, though this is only a 100 megabit Ethernet connection. I don't know that makes any difference. This looks fine. Whenever I'm like running Linux on like an Atom N450 or something like that, I can't even do what I just did. Like this frequently won't even load. So I'm already impressed. And then we go over and watch a video, and there we go. That's 1080p 60 playing in the browser just fine, not even dropping any frames. But here's something interesting I discovered. When I first pulled this up, I had Dark Souls minimized in the background, and this video played fine, but then I went over and played one of my own, and it was totally unwatchable. Like, it was skipping so many frames that I couldn't even make out what was going on. Then when I closed the game, that stopped happening. But check this out. If we wave the mouse around, it happens again. The frame rate just goes to hell. And what I noticed is that if we go to Stats for Nerds, this is in the AV01 codec, while this one is in the AVC1 codec. So my assumption is that this one's getting decoded on the graphics card, because AVC1, that's H.264, right? Yeah, that's H.264. So I'm guessing the GPU is decoding this one, whereas this one has to hit the CPU. Now, the CPU is still keeping up. We have to give it credit for that. But as soon as you start interacting with the rest of the browser, I think the CPU utilization just goes nuts. Let's see if we can confirm that. Yeah, so we're at 60, 75% right now. We start waving the mouse, and yep, it pegs the processor. Although, in fact, I guess because I'm covering up part of the video, it's actually coping with it better. Or maybe it's just fine now. Yeah, I don't know. Either way, yeah, for a 2006 processor to be keeping up with this kind of modern internet usage, I don't know what that says about like the optimization that Firefox is doing or what, but this typically does not work. So I've been pretty impressed. Now, I did have a couple of problems along the way that were kind of entertaining. At first, I was trying to play Silksong on here, and I would only get a few seconds in, and the machine would just shut off. And it turns out, or at least I think what happened, is that the power supply was bad, or was getting there. This guy is a 460 watt, and the math makes sense that it should be able to run this machine. That's a RX 470, which is a 120 watt GPU, and then a pair of 65 watt processors adds up to, I'm bad with math, 200 odd, whatever. It's much less than 460 watts, right? So it should work, but it wasn't. And I did notice that this thing was getting hot. So I pulled it out and replaced it with another supply I had sitting around that was in better condition and higher wattage, and now it works perfectly. So I'm not sure if it was just hitting some sort of thermal limit and shutting off to protect itself, or if it was actually going bad. But either way, that's fixed now, and so the machine seems to be absolutely rock solid stable. Although, a funny thing about that is that while I was installing Steam games, I noticed that periodically I would hear one of the fans ramp up, but it was only once in a long while. Like it would sit there for a good, because it took a very long time to download Dark Souls 3. That's 24 gigs, which I had to pull down at 100 megabits per second, and it was pegging the CPU the whole time, decrypting and decompressing the contents, right? So it was hitting the machine pretty hard, and yet the fans weren't ramping up any. They sounded just like they do now. Which is weird because we know they can go faster. During boot up, they go faster. So why they weren't screaming, I don't know. But then periodically, one of them would just ramp way up. I started getting really curious, and I went in and started poking around in the temperature monitor, but the graph didn't show any spikes. And then after about 20 minutes of dinking around with it and contemplating this and trying to figure out what the explanation could be, I suddenly realized that the top two lines here actually say core 0 and core 1, not CPU 0 and 1. And then I made the window bigger and discovered there were two more cores down there. And so I had not, in fact, been looking at the temperature for the second CPU, which, as it turned out, was somewhere north of 75 degrees Celsius when I looked at it. So there is actually a 20-degree delta between the two CPUs, which I think pretty strongly suggests that my method of attaching the heatsink was, in fact, a failure. And, you know, that's just as well, because that heatsink is not a sustainable solution anyway, since it doesn't actually fit. You know, you can't put the drive cage in. So I think I have developed enough strange affinity for this computer, which is performing much better than I expected in the tasks I could think of off the top of my head. And also just, I don't know, there's a certain kind of a trooper energy to it I can't explain. I kind of love this monitor, right? Like, it's got to be a cheap industrial panel, but now that I think about it, wait, maybe it isn't, because there's like almost no off-axis. Is this IPS? Is this damn thing IPS? All it says is TFT. It doesn't say what technology it is, but I mean, once in a while, there's just like a really nice looking, you know, TN panel in something, and they seem to have gotten it for this. Like, there's just something compelling about the way this panel looks, and it's also big. Like, for a 4x3 display, you know, 17 inches doesn't sound like that much, but just when it's sitting in front of you like this, I don't know, it sort of hits different, right? And honestly, like, just looking at videos on this, for instance, there's something compelling about it. It just feels nice. So I don't know what I'm going to do with this thing long term, but I think I don't want to gut it. I think I want to keep this board in here and see if I can make it even better than it is. So I think I'm going to see if I can track down some heat sinks that actually fit in here and maybe cool it more effectively, and just see. I don't know what to do. I mean, what more can I do with this other than play some strangely modern games and browse the internet, which I've already done. But I don't know. You know how it is with these sort of projects. You have this feeling that, man, I just want to interact with it just a little bit more. Hey, you know what I forgot to show you the entire time that we've been here? It is positively hilarious that I just completely slipped my mind. yeah, you can take the keyboard and mouse off and set it down here. And it's not super ideal because it uses this funky cable. Though now that I think about it, I wonder if there's a connector at the other end of that, because it would be neat if I could replace this with a standard Cat5 cable, because it's got an RJ45 on this end, right? And I guess I could just put a little extension on there too. But anyway, yeah, they let you take this off and use it wherever it feels a little more comfortable. I do wish that this had flip-up feet on it, because honestly, like, the fact that it doesn't means it sort of makes more sense to use it on the machine. Honestly, all things considered, it could be a much worse board. I'm not sure if these are actual key switches or if it just has a, oh, no, they're real. It's got, you know, cherry clones in there, or maybe real cherries, who knows. So like, gosh, at this point, almost the only thing I can really criticize is the touchpad, which is fine for what it is. It would just be nicer if it were, you know, more modern and had multi-touch and was bigger and stuff. But at that point, you're really picking nits. For 2006, this case kicks ass. I love this thing. I want more of these. As soon as I'm done shooting this video, I'm gonna go see if I can find the other models on eBay. I have the feeling that they've all been lost to time, but might as well check, because if I can get that one that that has the backplane motherboard support, that could be really fun in some indescribable way I can't explain. In conclusion, no conclusion. Thanks for watching this. For whatever it's worth, messing around with old computers is fun, even if they're not as old as maybe some of the other ones. I don't know. You always feel like having to justify. Oh, it's not that old. The damn thing's 20 years old. I think it counts. This is retro computing. Fun fact, by the way, the specific reason I was trying to use, I mentioned earlier I was trying to install macOS 10.11, I think. The reason for that is that it was, I think, the last version that would work without SSE 4.1, which was simultaneously weird to think that this processor didn't have a major instruction type that modern ones did, despite being able to do seemingly everything else. But also, man, what SSE are we on at this point then, if 4.1 is that old? But anyway, I only actually started shooting this to experiment with recording video on my phone, which I gotta say has been a massive success, all things considered. I need to make a video about how I made this video, because it's kind of a wild trip that I didn't think was actually gonna work, but it did work. So, thank you for watching. Have a good night or whatever.